it, everything that we do needs to be tied to souls. We don't need to go out. Heard somebody say one time, if you use a gimmick to get them, you're going to have a gimmick to keep them, and that's not the purpose of VBS or anything else we do. But hopefully some of those visitors, we had several visitors that came, and hopefully they'll be back and be able to teach them the truth. That's true of everything that we do. It's just getting more difficult now. I guess, I don't know if it is or not. It's always been difficult to, when you start teaching the truth and competing against denominations who have a lot more. Matter of fact, that's kind of what our lesson's about today. A lot of you denominations have a lot more to offer worldly than we do. And it's hard to compete against a lot of big buildings and money that many denominations have. The Lord's church is usually, they devote a lot of their, rather than building big buildings, we put money in teaching, mission work, edifying, things like that. I never will forget, my wife told a story. She and, in fact, years ago when the kids were little, she and a friend of hers that had kids, they went to the beach. Coming back, it was either on Wednesday night or Sunday. They stopped at somewhere on 43, some of them little towns that you go through. And a friend is a member of the denominational church. She said, she was saying, "Is that it?" And that was a pretty big Baptist church, pretty nice. My wife says, "No, it's this one right here, a little bitty building, and nothing impressive." And you could kind of, Sonia said she kind of was disappointed that it wasn't a big building with the steeple and the big parking lot, stained glass, little bitty buildings. That's been kind of our calling card for years. We're getting away from that some, and that's fine if it's used for the right purpose. Anyhow, good to see everybody. Good to see you, Romeo. We let Bob come in. We have a prayer. I think Jamie and I know Jamie actually went home. They're home and still sore. So pray for them.
Well, yeah.
They had a wreck.
Oh.
Yeah, had a wreck. Friday sometime. Wasn't that, because I went by there. My days mixed up. Anyhow, it was sometime Friday, and but they got to go home. Bow with me and we'll begin our class. Father, we're grateful for the love that you've shown us, grateful for blessing us in such a good way. Thankful for the VBS and all the effort that went in by everyone here. Thank you for that. Thank you for blessing us. Bless us with a good class today, Father. In your Son's name I pray. Amen. Just imagine, Hebrews was written, I'm told, of course we don't really know, 65 AD, 60, 65. Some people might be a little different than that. That's, nevertheless, 30 years after Pentecost. You obeyed the gospel on maybe Pentecost, or maybe some of the ones that obeyed the gospel on Pentecost, they started being persecuted and they left Jerusalem and they went somewhere else, and you obeyed the gospel from what they taught you. And you left Judaism, kind of like the little church that we talked about. You're in a situation now where Judaism, their priests, their system was what the priests have? They had the ornate dress. And what did the church have? Did it have that? And pressure was being put on you. You left something that you'd been a part of for years. Pressure was being put on you. Come back. Why are you a part of that? You know, look at what you left. So this chapter here, at least the first 9 or 10 verses, is going to pertain kind of to trying the pressure being put on them to come back, but yet the author of Hebrews, who that is, maybe Paul, maybe not, I don't know. Maybe we'll find out. We will find out one day, because we're going to heaven. Maybe we can ask him in paradise. But, you know, that pressure is being put on you, so this writing is to hit you that, hey, what you've got is better. Christ is not only a high priest, but he is a king. And you've got both. So that's kind of what our, breaking it down, kind of what our lesson is going to be about. So we'll start with verse number 1. For every high priest being taken from among men is appointed for men in things pertaining to God, that he may offer both gifts and sacrifices. So I'm going to read a lot of this. I'm getting it from Kaufman's commentary and some of the things that he says, you know, I kind of agree with. Some of these I don't see. You can't go by commentary, you can go by the Bible, of course, but he gives us an insight into some things that sometimes we don't think about. Don't believe everything commentary says, is what I'm saying. In the Jewish system, a tremendous weight of significance and emphasis was placed upon the glorious office of a high priest. Rightly so. And for the encouragement of Christians tempted to revert back to Judaism. Now, they've been Christians. Some of them could have been Christians for 30-something years. And of course, you know, a lot of pressure put on them to go back. Why? Why are you a part of this? It was therefore necessary to show that Christ was and is a great high priest, not merely equal, but vastly superior to any of the high priests that Israel has or ever has. We know some of the the Bible called some of the high priests pretty sorry, not very good people. Well, a lot of them, matter of fact, a lot of them, if we compare to Christ, we know there's no comparison, but just even as a Christian, they didn't, well, they weren't Christian, but even as Christian standards, they were not good.
Justin said,
okay. Let's see where I'm at. In this, the following verses, the author of Hebrews analyzes high priesthood of Christ in such a manner as to prove that Christians who had given up the priesthood of Aaron and his successors had in Christ received far more than they lost. We know that's true. But the writer here is trying to tell them, hey, you're where you need to be. You don't need to be back in Judaism. In every conceivable comparison, as rank, character, quality of service, or sacrifice, or whatsoever, the marvelous superiority of Christ is demonstrated in what a priest needs to be. And these 10 or 11 verses that we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about the qualifications of what God wants the high priest to be. Number 1, should be taken from people. In our elections that we have, in the world, we want people. We don't want people that's from another country. We want people that understand us. Starting with our local elections, state elections, national elections. We want those people that can relate to us, and that's the same way with the high priest. Of course, they were from the tribe of Aaron, Levi, and he should be appointed by God. But God is supposed to appoint him. We know that didn't happen in some cases. Sometimes kings appointed. have a tender compassion for those he represents. If we're gonna lead people, we need to, be compassionate with them and understand their feelings. Possess an adequate sacrifice. Know how to sacrifice. Both for him, were they like Christ as far as sins? Christ didn't have any sins. They did. Before they would sacrifice, either for whatever they did, the once a year things or the daily things, they had to sacrifice for themselves, for the forgiveness of sins, because they were sinful people. and refrain from taking such an honor unto themselves. In other words, what happened to a lot of the high priests as far as the position they had? It happens to our government officials too.
Went to their head.
They got the big head. That hat that they wore when they got first put in office, it wouldn't fit anymore. They got the big head, didn't it? Then he proceeds to show how, in all these matters, Christ possessed the most extraordinary qualifications above all of them. Without a doubt, the earthly splendor of Jewish high priests was a factor of seductive influence on Christians, especially those of Jewish background. Now, a lot of the Christians weren't previous Jews, Gentiles, so it maybe didn't affect them. But Jewish Christians, it had to have. You just imagine on the day of Pentecost, one minute you're following Judaism. You're trying your best to follow the law of Moses. And then that day, on the day of Pentecost, Peter, along with the other apostles, preached that sermon. And you saw, you believed, and you said, hey, we crucified Christ. We're in sin. You obeyed the gospel, and it was just, you went from one thing to the other, and they had it hard. They had family problems, friends, where they worked. Judaism worship, Saturdays. They had to worship. They worshiped on Sundays, so even your work was affected. A lot of times that worship had to take place at night on Sundays because they had to work on Sunday. Okay. And it affected their lives. And that's where they're coming from here. It'll be a lot easier for you to go back to Judaism. The priest, he gives an example of what they're dealing with here. The rich robes, the extravagantly ornate breastplate. Remember, the breastplate they had to wear, it was decorated. The unique privilege of entering the Holy of Holies. On the Day of Atonement. His status as judge and president of the Sanhedrin. He was put up there pretty good pedestal, on a high pedestal. Government officials, representatives, he was in that crowd. More especially at a time when they had no king. Christians, they didn't have a king, and you'd been used to having some kind of leader. Of course, they had a king, but he was not visible to them. And it had to have been hard. Let's see. The government officials, they would show grudgingly, they would show them respect, the high priest, in many cases. All these things and many others elevate the Jewish high priest to a position of isolated splendor in the eyes of the people. And if you were a Jewish Christian, you were sitting out there kind of over here. You wasn't involved in that. So they had a hard time, dealing with this and trying to explain why this is better. That's why this writing is taking place. And this writing, they had several years that everyone who wrote this, he could see the problem. So he wrote this explaining, hey, you're where you need to be. The gifts and sacrifices is first mentioned in the latter part. What this commentary here says, that it has special reference to the Day of Atonement and to the ceremonial offering of blood. You know, they had blood sacrifice and they had a non-blood sacrifice. Separate mention of gifts and sacrifices is distinctive between the unbloody offerings and the bloody ones. That's what he makes reference to. Now, that's, commentary, of course. Both classes were offered on the Day of Atonement. Okay, any questions about verse 1? Comments? Verse 2, who can bear gently with the ignorant and the erring? Talk about the priest. For that he himself also is encompassed with the infirmity. In other words, he's a sin too. He's a sinful person too, so he has to first offer sacrifices for himself before he offers sacrifice for me, if I go and ask for that. And of course, Christ doesn't have to do that. The need of compassion on the part of a high priest is stressed here, a qualification sadly lacking in many held positions. And we could see that in a lot of the high priests, that they were not really, they were hypocrites, I guess you might say, easy word. There were few priests, this is what he said, there were few priests in Israel who manifested the personal qualities so indispensable to their sacred office. We can name a few of them, and we're going to name one here. It says, when this was written, who wrote it? A lot of these people could remember. Can you remember Annas? Annas, who had a part in, he was there when Christ was crucified. They remembered him, and he even had a person killed. I didn't look back where that is, but he had him put to death. But finally, he was so bad that even the Roman governors had him disposed, so he could not inflict any death. It's my understanding, and I've read it somewhere, and some of you might know that a high priest could have someone put to death, or he could forgive their sins. Now, if that's not true, forgive me. But I was told if the sin was accidental or was not just planned, and I'm going to do it anyhow, then he would sacrifice for it. But if it was one that he just did, he did that sin and he didn't care, then the high priest has had him put to death. Now, that's not true. I'm going to try to find it. You know anything?
Paul or Saul, he was sent out by the high priest, take the lives of Christians. I suppose, when under the law, certain things required death, stoning, like Stephen and others, when they did wrong, they were stoned. I suppose that the high priest
could have that
been high religious official, and I'm sure with other priests, would make that decision.
So that could be, that's true then. Yeah. Hadn't thought about that, but that's good. Thank you. All right. Regardless of the failure of many high priests to possess the virtue of compassion mentioned here, that virtue should nevertheless be held prerequisite to the exercise of any meaningful sacred ministry, and far more for that such a high office. In other words, if you're going to hold an office, it needs to be compassionate. We need to be compassionate as Christians. We're priests. We need to be compassionate, for people who are lost. And that brings to mind Paul. You remember what Paul said in Romans 9? He said, I have great sorrow, when he's talking about the church and how they have fallen away. I have great sorrow and unceasing pain in my heart, for I wish that I myself were anathema from Christ. In other words, away. What does that word mean, Ernie? You, the dictionary.
A bad thing to Christ, talk about he that preaches to gospel that he'd be an anathema.
Yeah,
So it's he's doing something.
yeah, taken away from Christ, yeah. Paul said, let me be taken away from Christ. From Christ, for my brother's sake, my kinsman according to the flesh. In other words, I'd rather be, if they were better than what they are, and they're not, and if they're not, then if that would change, if that would help anything, then let me be taken away from Christ. Let me be lost. And you remember what Moses said one time, Exodus somewhere, he said, when it was about the time when the golden calf was made, and he was talking to God, he said, take my name out of the book of life for my people, if it will help, forgive them, then take my name. So that'd be hard to do, when, in other words, to let you be, to just say, well, I'll be lost for them. And that'd be great love. And of course, we're supposed to give our life. I would be willing to give my life, but I don't know if I'd be willing to give my soul or not. Many of our first responders and our military folks, they give their lives, but I wouldn't expect them to give their soul, because that's what Paul and Moses did. We did say here, but that'd be a lot to say. Any questions, comments?
Just one small comment.
All right.
In today's society, they don't particularly use the word high priest. But we have all these mega churches that they call the leader doctor.
Uh-huh.
Would that be of the same? And the reason I say that is because of the teaching and the way in today's society. It's a religious world where it seems like they're not teaching righteousness one to the other. So they can't be going by the book.
Yeah. We're told not to call anybody father, reverend, and that word doctor, you know why? They want to be elevated. They want to be above
the law, above the word of God.
We have 3 elders here, and a lot of congregations have elders, but we're not above anybody. All we are, we're just responsible to God for what goes on here.
My thought was all these mega churches, and I can call names, but I won't. It seemed like that doctor should be affecting the congregations in a righteous manner, and the righteousness and the Christians should be affecting the world.
It would be if they were teaching the right thing. That's the thing, they're not teaching it. Once you get away, once you open that door and get away from one truth, then it's easy to open it a little wider and add another truth that's not correct to it. Ernie?
We have a lot of doctors in our brotherhood who preach, but they prefer you didn't use that doctor before their name.
Yeah.
They want to just be Gus, Brother Woods, Guy Woods.
Guy Woods.
Yeah, he had all sorts of credentials.
Yeah.
He was this Guy Woods.
Right. Brother Woods, yeah. Anytime we think we're better than everybody, anybody, we need to, kind of evaluate where we are. Christ was first to be humble. Pride mentioned a lot in the Bible, and it's not mentioned in good in nowhere that I know of. So we want to be careful that we don't exhibit that. Okay, verse 3. And by reason thereof is bound. Let's see, is that where we are? Did we read 3?
No, you did.
Thank you. Yeah, I got a good rhyme. I just can't remember good. So. And by reason thereof is bound, as for the people, so also for himself to offer for sins. Here the author touches on one of the great differences between the high priest of Israel and in Jesus Christ, whereas they were thoroughly the infirmity of sin, and they were sinful, required to offer blood for themselves. Christ, being sinless and undefiled, was laid under no such necessity, like we talked about. The high priest was required to offer sacrifices for his own sins as well as the sins of the people. Thus, he did not only on special occasions and for special offenses have to do that. Leviticus 4, we can read about that in Leviticus. But also in all the regular daily, weekly things. This was not a yearly thing, even though he had to do that. He had daily and weekly and monthly sacrifices that he had to do. And each of those required him, first of all, to make him right. I heard Brother Walter, you remember his prayer? He'd always begin most of the time he'd begin his prayer with, he prayed that he was in the right relationship with God before, so he could lead this prayer. He'd do that a lot. And that's, maybe wouldn't have to do that in a prayer, but we need to do it in such a way that where we are okay and we're in the right relationship with God before we pray for anybody, ourselves or anyone. In all these, there were an acknowledgement of his own guilt as well as the guilt of the brother. Any questions? Verse 4, and no man taketh the honor up to himself, but when he is called of God, even as was Aaron. Only God has a right to appoint such a thing as a high priest. We know that. And that law was broken, that we know. Who would represent his people before the presence on high. And only God has a right to name a high priest of all mankind. This verse lays the premise for showing that Christ too is called and appointed by God, even though he's part of the Godhead. He was still called by God to the great office which he exercised on behalf of us, all men.
The Romans took it upon themselves to appoint somebody the high priest.
Yeah.
Whoever would work best for them, that's what they wanted. That's why we had Annas and Caiaphas, both called high priests at the same time. One was appointed by the Romans, the other one was the senator of Aaron.
Yeah. They, kind of like that today, and as far as government officials that get to office, they want somebody there. They're going to try their best to appoint someone that's going to believe like they believe and be able to carry on their purposes. So. Okay, 5 and 6, we'll put these two together. So Christ also glorified not himself to be made high priest, but he that spake unto him, thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. As he saith in another place, thou art a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. We've heard that term. I think we've got verse 7, chapter 7 got more about Melchizedek we'll talk about later. This is in reference to why Christ is a perfect high priest for the new Christians, fairly new Christians and new Christians, that rather than going back to Judaism. What it says here, it says, this is one of the most significant declarations about Christ to be found in all the Bible. Appointed by God, high priest like the order of Melchizedek. And he says this is the most significant declaration the writer of this book says. And in all probability, Hebrews, this book was the first ever who understood exactly, what it meant, I guess is what it says. Psalm 110 is referenced, it's about the quotes, it's in the same way, this is what he's quoting from. And it said that that prophecy that united in a single person the offices of both high priest, or both king and high priest. That is in the person of Christ. So he's the only one. So you need to, that's where you need to be, and you have it better than those Judaizing Jews that's trying to get you to go back to something that's already been done away with. Stay where you are. It says the author of Hebrews then did a dramatic, unheard of thing. It was mentioned in the first chapter of Hebrews. I don't know, 5, I think it says here 5. Go back, and it's identical again. He's mentioned it before, but he comes back to it again, trying to emphasize it, trying to nail it home. Having already argued at Psalms 110, 1 and 2 for the universal kingship of Christ, the Messiah, and then he goes to the first chapter, verse 5. At this point in the epistle, he returned to that same Psalms 110 to bring in both verse from which he also proclaimed the universal high priest of Christ, showing him to be not of Aaron's line. That was the argument that the Sadducees, Pharisees, Sadducees had. He's not even of the line of Aaron. He can't be a high priest. It says, showing him to be not of Aaron's line, but an independent high priest of the universal dominion after the order of Melchizedek. Thus, he was revealed at last the mystery of how the suffering high priestly Messiah and the kingly Messiah were one and the same person. And that's your high priest. That's who you need to stay with. You cannot accept Christ as your high priest, the Pharisee says, because since he does not belong to the line of Aaron, he is disqualified from being any kind of priest, whatever. And the only verse in the Bible that clears that up is, of course, Psalm 110, verse 4. They didn't understand that, or they didn't want to understand it, or they didn't. They tried to not use that. Misuse it. The Pharisees should have known this, but it was true to them as it is for the Sadducees that they did err, not knowing the Scriptures nor the power of God. And we look at Matthew 22 where it talks about that also. Any questions? Comments?
Melchizedek was a priest long before.
And king. Yeah, just like Christ.
Some people think that because he was the king of Salem, I think that might be Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And but that was long before the Levites came along, and the high priest after Aaron. Mm-hmm. That was probably several hundred years. Yeah. Abraham's time, which would have been about 1500 BC, something like that. Then 80, but
no, it'd be BC.
No, BC.
Yeah. Somebody, anyhow, Abraham made tithes to Melchizedek. Yeah. Okay.
Melchizedek was a priest, like where he said, not from Aaron's line. And Jesus was not under Aaron's line, so that's why the Jewish rejected him as being a high priest, because he was not in the line of Levites.
Right.
And that's why they said he was in the order of Melchizedek. Melchizedek was not a Levite.
Yeah. That's kind of hard for me to sometimes understand. I wish I knew more about that situation. We don't know a lot about Melchizedek. No family line, and but we know that God does mention it, Stephen.
Remember what Jesus told them On the Sermon on the Mount, one of the first things he said, I did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law.
Mm-hmm.
In the old law, what do you find in Leviticus, Numbers, all these sacrifices for the priests had to do all the sacrifices, they had to be of the tribe of Levi. Jesus was not in the tribe of Levi, so how do you fulfill the law with all the sacrifices, all that stuff, and he was not Levi? Well, I think it explains later in Hebrews. Jesus, see the priests sacrificed the animals, the bulls, the goats, these doves, but God told him that the blood of bulls and goats could not forgive sins. Mm-hmm. So Jesus, the way Jesus fulfilled the law, it says later here, and it's probably going to be in like chapter 10 or something. In chapter 9:27, and as it is appointed for men to die once, but afterwards the judgment. Mm-hmm. So Christ was offered once to bear the sins of many. And those who eagerly wait for him, we will hear from the time apart from the salvation. So when he said, like the reason the way Jesus fulfilled the law was he offered himself. So he did not have to be a Levi, because he was doing away with that whole system by fulfilling the law in himself.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Any other comments?
You know, under the law of Moses, the priesthood, you know, everybody had to be from Levi, tribe of Levi. But you know, that wouldn't, I mean, it made their sins go forward, but it didn't alleviate them. But there had to be a change of the priesthood, because that under that old law, it didn't do away with their sins, it just moved them forward. But there had to be a change in the priesthood. Mm-hmm. And that's what Christ has done. He's under the order of Melchizedek, which is nothing to do with the Mosaical law or the Levitical priesthood. Mm-hmm. Now the priesthood has changed. I mean, and it is now able to, under Christ, able to completely do away with it.
Here's another tidbit. Jesus is our high priest, but guess what? Every one of us in this room are also priests. Yep. Because we're part of we have actually been adopted.
Christ is our high priest. Yeah. We go through him to get to God. Don't you think that a lot of this right here, from the Pharisees and the Sadducees, you think they were thinking of it from a spiritual thing, or were they thinking of it from a billfold thing? Money. They had not just the money, but the prestige and the power they had. In other words, they do it away with my job. I'm going to have to go out and start working.
I think some of the people too, they really feared, because of the persecutions that were brought to them because of the Jews. Mm-hmm. That system of government or system of religion, having to put it. They feared, because the priest or that high priest, they could do some, they could take their life.
That's right.
Like that blind man, he said, his mother and daddy feared the Jews because they could remove them from the law,
they could affect them. The way I understand it, the Christians, like in the marketplace, they'd have the right to go and sell their goods or make money, and they were being persecuted. They were being persecuted because they wouldn't be allowed to do that, or they'd have to, rather than having the front table up here to sell my figs, they put me in the back, back over there where nobody would see my figs. that was kind of what I read as far as it was making it hard on them. Kind of like us today, maybe, you know, we don't see it right now, but you don't ever know the way our government's headed. You know, and I pray that, you know, that's going to turn around, but you don't ever know that one day they might make it hard on us to say things. I know back years ago there was some mayor in Texas one time tried to make all the preachers turn in their sermons to her. I think she was a lesbian, and she didn't get it passed. But I mean, just think, you know, she tried to do it, so you don't ever know. She didn't want that kind of things preached from the pulpits. Pray that won't happen. We'll be able to always preach the truth. Okay, let's see if we can get through with at least verse 7. Who in the days of his flesh, talking about Christ, having suffered, offered prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and having been heard for his godly fear. Okay, of course, talks about Christ in Gethsemane praying and praying to God that he would take this cup from him. And it says the agony that he was going through. The cup was the crucifixion, but he was going through agony when you sweat drops of blood, you're going through a lot of agony. And he was saying that that was not really the cup that he was referring to. It was pain and suffering. And of course, what did Peter do? He was trying to defend him, and Christ told him, said, put your sword up, put it back in your sheath, because he said, shall I not drink this cup? You know, I got to do it. And aren't we thankful that he did? And he does make this. It says, thus, that's John 18:11. Thus Christ's prayer was truly heard. We know that because it said he was. Just like Christ, because of his godly fear. And he hears our prayer. Now, does he answer it like we want it? Did he answer Christ's prayer like he wanted it? No. But it says here, somehow God answered it. You know, one thing that we need to understand is if we're faithful, trying to live a good, faithful life, if we pray, we must understand. We got to understand that God is going to do something that he probably would not have done had we not prayed. Because he hears our prayer. He's going to hear them. Now, is he going to answer them like, you know, if I've got cancer and God please eliminate this cancer from my body, and let the doctors and nurses, whatever they do. He might not do that, but he's going to help me in some way. He sent angels to Christ to not lessen the pain, because he had to go through the pain for us, but maybe give him the strength, stronger heart to be able to withstand the pain. And that, you know, what Paul say with his infirmities, he prayed to God. What God tell him? What is sufficient? Grace is sufficient. For some reason, he didn't take that thorn in the flesh away from Paul. You don't know. You wonder. You might say, you know, we would say, well, look, Paul would have been a much better preacher, a much better evangelist if he didn't have that. God didn't think so. And he looks at us and in some of our problems, and he might say, well, I'm not going to take that pain away, but I'm going to give you the strength, my faith, my faith is sufficient to get you through it. I'm going to help you in your heart and make your heart stronger.
You often wonder, and I've wondered, whatever was the infirmity that Paul suffered, it makes me wonder, and it's not in the Bible anywhere, so there's no reference to it. But maybe he kept that thorn in his flesh to let him know that the suffering that he caused the Christians, he would have to suffer through.
Yeah. Don't know, you know.
But like he said, my grace is sufficient for you. So it's not going to be a pain that's not going to be that he couldn't manage. Basically, that he would always know that he had that thorn in the flesh.
And our pain, our suffering like that should make us stronger. The Bible says that somewhere. You know, we grow stronger because of it. So I didn't hardly get through, but I don't know anybody know who got the next one?
I do.
You. Thank you. I appreciate it. All the comments. How are you doing? Good to see you.
Good to be here. Yesterday, they have something I. I didn't know that. I went to the class.
I know. Yeah, they were there. How you doing?
I'm trying to get the break.
Literally, super magnet. I've been jumping up
Is mine down?
Yours today.
You make your bed, don't you? Mimi has to make your bed. You make your bed this morning.
Brady's not here today. Brady. Hey, girl.
You're not still doing push-ups, are you? You're not still doing push-ups.
Not having to worry about going back to school. I know you do. I did.
How you feeling? Hey, brother, how are you, sir? I was looking at you, boy. I saw you coming down here. You can't have one. Please ask what to bring
Huh?
You know the hug you go.
I'm good.
Golf?
What's up, ladies?
I got it.
Jason didn't want to hug.